He wasn't supposed to come home that day. As Brandon Whitaker stepped out of the sleek black town car, his leather shoes touched the gravel of the driveway for the first time in weeks. The automatic gates had barely clicked shut behind him. The sky above Crestfield Heights was dusky, painted with the last gold strokes of sunset, but Brandon barely noticed. His mind was still buzzing from the call he'd received just an hour earlier. His deal in Tokyo had collapsed, leaving him with nothing but time, frustration, and the sudden urge to see his son. The mansion was quiet. Too quiet. Brandon didn't announce himself. He didn't text the house manager or ring the intercom. He slipped in through the side entrance, like a stranger in his own home. The house, all glass and marble and silence, loomed around him like a museum where nothing was meant to be touched. It always felt more like a fortress than a home, but his son, Mason, was here. That mattered more than any cold architecture. He heard laughter. Not his son's. Soft, warm, maternal laughter floated from the sunroom down the hallway. Then came Mason's high-pitched giggle, the kind Brandon hadn't heard in weeks. That laugh, unfiltered, alive, stopped him in his tracks. He followed the sound on instinct, his briefcase still in one hand, his coat draped over the other arm. As he neared the sunroom, he slowed. Through the cracked door, he could see them. There, on the plush carpet, was 6-year-old Mason in his pajamas, sitting cross-legged with a crayon in each hand. In front of him, completely unaware she was being watched, was Elena, the maid. She was on her knees, a smile stretching across her face as she pretended to be a dragon, crawling around him, letting him defeat her with cardboard swords and imaginary fire. Brandon's breath caught. This wasn't cleaning. This wasn't tidying up after dinner or dusting the corners. This was mothering. Real, intimate, honest love. Elena roared dramatically and collapsed onto the floor, allowing Mason to jump on her back triumphantly. "You did it, brave knight," she said, gasping playfully. "You saved the kingdom." Mason giggled, threw his arms around her neck, and whispered something. She hugged him back, pressing her cheek against his hair. Brandon hadn't even taken off his shoes. He stepped back, heart thudding, his emotions a tangled knot of awe, guilt, and confusion. He had left his son in the care of staff, thinking expensive tutors and polished help would be enough while he pursued business empires overseas. But standing there, invisible to them, Brandon realized something deeply unsettling. He wasn't the hero in his son's life. Elena was. He quietly retreated before they noticed him. Upstairs, in the master bedroom, he sat on the edge of the massive bed, looking around the sterile, untouched room. Nothing here felt lived in. His presence in the house was so rare, even his scent was absent. Later that night, after Elena had tucked Mason into bed, Brandon made his presence known. She startled when she saw him descending the staircase. "Mr. Whitaker," she gasped, standing abruptly from the couch where she had been folding laundry. "I didn't mean to surprise you," Brandon said, setting his coat aside. "The Tokyo deal fell through. I came straight home." Elena nodded, awkward, unsure if she should return to her chores or make conversation. "You were playing with Mason," Brandon said after a moment, his tone unreadable. Elena stiffened. I'm sorry if I overstepped." He asked if I could be the dragon again. "He's been having nightmares, and the play helps him." "You don't need to apologize," Brandon interrupted. She blinked. "I watched you. For a moment. I didn't mean to, but," he rubbed the back of his neck. "You were amazing with him." Elena looked down, a little flustered. "He's a good boy." Brandon sat across from her, letting silence fill the room. He studied her. She was young, probably mid-20s, with tired eyes and calloused hands, the kind of woman most people overlooked. But she had brought life into a home where Brandon had brought only money. "You're more than just the maid to him, aren't you?" he asked gently. "I don't try to be," she said, voice soft. "But Mason," he needs someone. Brandon swallowed hard. The truth stung more than he wanted to admit. Mason did need someone. And Brandon hadn't been that someone for a long time. How long has he been having nightmares? Since the first month you left for Tokyo, Elena said, trying not to sound judgmental. He dreams you forget him. Brandon's heart sank. That night, he couldn't sleep. He walked past Mason's room around midnight and found the door ajar. Elena had left a soft nightlight on, and Mason was curled under his dinosaur blanket, one hand clutching a paper sword. The next morning, Brandon made a decision. A quiet, private one. He would stay. But staying would not be enough. He had to become a father. The next few days were awkward, especially for Mason. His dad was suddenly there every morning, making pancakes and oversalting them. Brandon tried to help with homework but got confused by the second-grade math. He offered to play, but Mason clung to Elena like she was the sun. Want to go to the zoo this weekend? Brandon asked one night over dinner. Mason looked at Elena. Will you come? Brandon paused. I meant just us two. Like a guy's trip. Mason's eyes dropped to his plate. Can Elena come too? Brandon smiled, though it stung. She can come. At the zoo, Brandon watched them again. Elena lifted Mason onto her shoulders to see the giraffes, pointed out facts on signs, made up stories about the monkeys. Brandon handed over money for snacks and tried to laugh along, but he was always one beat behind. Later, while Mason ran ahead toward the petting zoo, Brandon turned to her. How do I fix this? He asked. Elena looked at him, surprised by his honesty. Fix what? My son doesn't need a millionaire. He needs a father. She hesitated. Then be one. Even if it's clumsy. Even if it's hard. You just have to keep showing up. The word stayed with Brandon long after the day ended. He started waking Mason up himself each morning. Helped him brush his teeth. Took him to school. Sometimes, he failed, he forgot the backpack one day, packed a lunch with all junk food the next, but Mason started to laugh more. He no longer hesitated to reach for Brandon's hand. Then one evening, after a long day at the park, Mason fell asleep on the couch with his head in Brandon's lap. Elena walked in and froze at the sight, her eyes softening. Brandon met her gaze. He called me Dad today, he whispered. She smiled. He should. You earned it. Brandon stared down at his sleeping son, gently brushing a stray curl from Mason's forehead. The boy sighed and nestled closer, as if, even in sleep, he could feel his father's presence for the first time in a long while. When Brandon finally stood and carried Mason to bed, something within him had shifted. There was no turning back now, not to the boardrooms, not to the lonely hotel suites or the red-eye flights. This house, this boy, this new version of himself, this was where he needed to be. The next morning, he met Elena in the kitchen before sunrise. She was already prepping breakfast, the smell of cinnamon and toast filling the room. I've been thinking, Brandon began, pouring himself a cup of coffee. You've given Mason something I never could. Not just care. Not even love. You gave him presence. And I need to thank you properly. Elena turned to him, wiping her hands on a towel. You don't need to thank me. I just did what he needed. No, Brandon said firmly. You filled the gap I left behind. She lowered her eyes. You're doing better now. I'm trying, he admitted. But I also realized something else. Mason's life shouldn't depend on the kindness of a maid who wasn't hired to do any of this. You became family, whether either of us expected it. Elena didn't know what to say. Her eyes shimmered for a moment, but she blinked quickly and turned back to the counter. Brandon cleared his throat. I want to support you, Elena. In whatever future you're building for yourself. I know you didn't come here planning to raise someone else's kid. She hesitated. I was just trying to survive. This job helped pay for my sister's surgery last year. I thought I'd only stay for 6 months. Then I met Mason. And 6 months became 2 years. Brandon was quiet for a moment. What were you doing before? I was in school. Studying early education. I had to drop out when my mom passed. A thought sparked in Brandon's mind. Would you go back? If you had the support? Elena looked at him, startled. What do you mean? I mean, I'd like to fund the rest of your education. A full scholarship. Any school. Any program. You deserve that chance. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She stepped back, visibly shaken. Why would you do that for me? Because you changed my son's life, he said simply. And mine. Tears welled in her eyes, and for once, she didn't look away. I wouldn't leave him, you know. Even if I went back to school. I wouldn't want you to, Brandon said. He needs you. And honestly, so do I. They stood in silence for a long time, emotions stretching between them like a fragile thread. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, respect, gratitude, maybe something deeper neither of them could name yet. In the following weeks, the household changed. Mason grew more confident. He started drawing pictures of his dad, not just dragons and castles. He and Brandon built a treehouse together, even though it leaned slightly to the left and had nails sticking out at awkward angles. Elena cheered them on, always nearby, encouraging, guiding without ever overstepping. Brandon started working from home, setting up a small office in what used to be a rarely used den. He took calls in the mornings, but by afternoon, he was fully present. Sometimes he still messed up, forgot school forms, burned grilled cheese, but Mason didn't seem to care. His dad was there. That was all that mattered. One evening, as summer began to roll in and fireflies danced in the backyard, Brandon sat with Elena on the porch steps, sipping lemonade. Mason was chasing the bugs with a jar, laughing wildly. I don't remember the last time I felt this, grounded, Brandon said quietly. Elena smiled. You were always capable of it. You just had to slow down long enough to see what mattered. He looked over at her, eyes soft. I hope you know how much I appreciate you. She nodded. I do. And I'm grateful too. You gave me a place to belong when I didn't have one. Brandon hesitated, then said, You're not just part of the household anymore. You're part of our family. She didn't answer, but the way she smiled told him she felt it too. As the months passed, Elena enrolled in night classes for her degree. Brandon insisted on driving her to campus himself whenever he could. He helped with her assignments sometimes, though she teased him for being awful at grammar. Mason drew a picture for her first presentation, a stick figure Elena standing next to him and Brandon, all three with crowns. On the night of her graduation, Mason held a handmade sign that read, We love you, Miss Elena, in glittery crayon letters. Brandon stood beside him, clapping with the loudest voice in the crowd. When Elena crossed the stage, her eyes searched for them first. When she spotted them, she smiled through tears. That evening, Brandon made a toast over dinner. To Elena, he said, raising his glass. Who came into our lives when we were falling apart, and quietly, piece by piece, made us whole again. Elena lowered her head, deeply moved. Mason threw his arms around her waist and whispered, You're my real hero. Later that night, when the house was quiet and Mason was tucked into bed, Brandon and Elena stood in the hallway outside his room. I don't know what our future looks like, Brandon said, voice low. But I know I don't want it to happen without you in it. Elena reached out and took his hand. Me neither. And for the first time in years, Brandon felt like he was exactly where he belonged, not in the boardroom, not in a foreign city chasing profits, but right here, where love had found a way into the cracks of his once empty life. Where family wasn't just the one you were born with, but the one you build together.